What's up, you guys? My name is Aubrey and this is my channel, and today I want to talk about the US economy. More specifically, I want to talk about what is the fate of the US economy as we head into the second half of 2020. So I'll be talking about where we currently stand with the economic climate, where I think the economy could be heading, and a few key things that I think we should all keep in mind. And most importantly, I'll be talking about some of the things that you can do to set yourself up for financial success regardless of which direction the economy heads in. So let's get started. We are now full swing into June, which is crazy to think about in itself because I feel like just yesterday was February. And as we head into June and into July, the economy is starting to tick up quite rapidly. In fact, in the month of May, unemployment was reported at a 13.3% versus the 18% that was expected. In the state of Texas, 75% capacity is returning to businesses. The stock market isn't that far off from its all-time highs earlier this year. And my dad sent me this photo of the DFW airport that he took earlier this week, showing just how packed it was, which means that people are returning to traveling and are starting to fly on planes again, which I think is a great sign. But the inevitable question that comes from all of these positive signs is all of this premature? And are we setting ourselves to be smacked in the face with reality come fall? And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know that there are a few key things that we need to keep in mind and we need to be aware of so that we are prepared regardless of which direction the economy heads in. So let's first talk about unemployment. So for the month of May, unemployment was reported at 13.3% versus the estimated 18%, which was seen as a huge victory with almost every official out there. The reason why unemployment is at 13% versus 18% is because of the PPP program, and that the PPP is almost falsely inflating employment numbers. In order for businesses to qualify for forgivable PPP funds, they had to keep their staff employed, they had to keep paying them, and they had to keep them on payroll. So as a result, businesses, even if they lost 75% of their normal revenue for the month of April, May, June, they still kept their staff employed because they had to in order to get their PPP funds forgiven. But what's going to happen once those PPP funds run out? Secondly, let's look at PUA, or Pandemic Unemployment Assistance. Ever since COVID-19 happened, the government started implementing PUA. It's essentially normal unemployment with an additional $600 per week tacked on top of that. This meant that people could potentially qualify for $1,000 a week in some cases on unemployment alone. And this was huge because it meant that even if you are somebody who lost your job, if you're somebody who lost their source of income, you still were receiving a pretty decent amount of money from the government, which meant that you could still spend money on groceries, you could still potentially go out to eat every once in a while. And as a result, the economy has still been able to be stimulated because people are still getting paid even if they're not working. But the problem is that PUA and after that, you will only qualify for normal unemployment, which for a lot of people like me, for example, who is a sole proprietor and an independent contractor, I don't qualify for regular unemployment. And anybody who's self-employed also doesn't qualify. So once the PUA runs out, there are going to be a lot of people who won't have any source of income coming in because they still don't have their standard income from pre-COVID times, but they no longer qualify for PUA. And so are we going to see a dramatic decrease in the stimulation of the economy because of the fact that people aren't receiving PUA benefits anymore? And I think that that's a very likely scenario that's going to happen. And lastly, one of the most important things that I think we should all keep in mind is eviction freezes and rent strikes. Over the last few months, we've seen rent strikes all over the country, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And in the CARES Act, it was passed to where landlords could not evict their tenants during this entire period of time, which means that nobody has been able to be evicted, even if they haven't been paying rent. There has been no late fees implemented on rent payments, and that comes to an end at the end of July. And so come the end of July, landlords can start evicting their tenants who haven't been paying rent. Now, they have to give a 30-day notice, and so even if you began the process of eviction at the end of July, you wouldn't be able to be formally evicted until the end of August. But either way, the effects of not paying your rent are going to start sinking in come the end of July. And what's going to happen then? Are we going to see a wave of people who are evicted from their houses and their apartments and their condos and are now homeless? Are we going to see a housing crisis? Are we going to see a mortgage crisis? I think that this event alone, the end of the eviction freezes, could be a kind of wave of effects that come afterwards. So even though all indications show that the economy is improving and we're in a pretty decent spot, all things considered, I am very concerned that all of these things are going to come together to create a perfect storm. That the fact that PUA is ending in July, eviction freezes are ending in July, that PPP, EIDL, and stimulus money has run dry, and what is going to happen once those funds are completely gone. And what happens if the government does not pass another round of stimulus? And even if they do pass another round of stimulus, is that just going to be postponing the inevitable? But then on the flip side, there is always a chance that maybe things will go exactly as we hope that they would go. Maybe the PPP and the EIDL programs are going to end up being implemented exactly as we hoped, meaning that they stimulate the businesses and the economy just long enough until consumers can begin stimulating the economy again. Maybe by the time PPP funds run out, that businesses will have enough revenue to support their staff and will have enough customers to support their own payroll costs rather than government funds supporting their payroll costs. Maybe instead of a W-shaped recovery, we will see a V-shaped recovery like all of us hope that we'll see. But regardless of what happens, whether we see a perfect storm of events which leads to a second crash, or if the government programs work as they were intended and we see the economy begin to improve and even flourish come the end of 2020, I think it is incredibly important to be prepared for either scenario. And here are a few ways that you can do that. The first thing that you can do is save for an emergency fund. Over the last few months, there have been many deferments on some of the normal month-to-month payments that so many of us have been making, from loan deferments to auto payment deferments to business loan deferments and so much more. But those deferments may not last come the end of 2020. And if a second wave does hit, you don't want to have to count on the fact that those payments are going to be deferred even longer, because that may not be the case. So the way to prepare for that and the way to set yourself up for success regardless of what happens in the economy is to have an emergency fund. Whatever you can save up, I highly encourage you to do that, whether it's 1 month of expenses, preferably 3 months of expenses, or even longer. Ideally, in a perfect scenario, you would want to have more than a year of emergency funds set aside in the case that you need to access it later on. But right now, with a short period of time that we have, I would encourage you to use any of the government benefits that you have, whether it's PUA, whether it's stimulus money, whatever the case is, and use those funds to assist you in the process of saving for an emergency fund, so that regardless of what happens with the economy, regardless of what happens with any sort of more stimulus bills that are passed, you are prepared to pay the bills that you're obligated to pay. And lastly, once you have your emergency fund saved up and you know that you can weather any financial storm, it is time to take advantage of the opportunity that has been laid out in front of you. The fact of the matter is, recessions are great times to make money. And if you have the extra funds available to you, I highly encourage you to look into different investment opportunities, whether it's real estate investments, stock investments, whatever the case is. Recessions are a great time to make money. And if you have your finances in check, and if you know that you can weather any financial storm, it's time to start making that money work for you and to put that money into investments so that once the recession is all said and done, you could actually be one of the few that come out ahead. So you guys, those are my thoughts on the 2020 economy and where we are headed as we come into the second half of the year. Now, I think a really big deciding factor on what ends up ultimately happening with the economy will be kind of the end of July going into the beginning of August, whenever PUA runs out, whenever eviction freezes end, and whenever PPP funds begin to dwindle down. And I think that that time frame will be an extremely important indicator telling us what's going to happen over the next 6 months to a year. But I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear kind of where you think the U.S. economy is headed. What are your thoughts on these government programs coming to an end? Do you think that they will be extended? If so, how long do you think they'll be extended? I would love to hear your thoughts, your comments, and your insights, so make sure to leave a comment below, and I will make sure to respond to every single comment. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.